Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to the now third Gamasutra Editorial Forum. This one is called Using Data for Good, made possible by our sponsors at Xsolla. I'm Chris Graft, Editor-in-Chief and Publisher of Gamasutra, and I'll be your host today. We have just a few very exciting announcements before we begin here. This forum is designed to be interactive, and there is a dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen that will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webcast via social media, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of this presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the resources widget. And toward the end of the forum, we will ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you could take a minute to fill that out, that would be great so that we can make these better. Maybe they're perfect already. I don't know. Let us know. And lastly, if you're experiencing any tech problems during the presentation, you can click on the help widget, which is found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be happy to offer one-on-one personal assistance. So onto our presentation. This is called Using Data for Good. Discussing that topic is Evan Losi, who is lead digital designer at Exploding Kittens. He has an engineering background, has a product management background, and he's been designing top mobile games since 2011, like Tap Zoo and Looney Tunes. He's currently lead digital designer at Exploding Kittens, and he is actually a multiple times speaker at Game Developers Conference. We'll also be joined for a short message from our sponsored friends at Xsolla. And presenting for them is their president, Chris Hewish. He's an award-winning interactive executive and studio head. He's formulated market strategies across all video game segments. He's also been in leadership roles at some little companies you might have heard of, like Activision, DreamWorks Animation, Servius, Skydance, and currently Xsolla. And remember to stick around. After that, there's going to be a 15-minute Q&A. And you can submit questions anytime you want. So with that, I'm going to let Evan take it away. Thanks, Evan.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Gamasutra and Xsolla, for hosting. And thank you, everyone, for coming in today and joining us. So, as he said, I'm Evan, and I'm really here today to talk about data. And the first thing is, why did I even call this talk Using Data for Good in the first place? And a lot of people can sometimes get a bad taste in their mouth at the thought of analytics and data with game design. It's something that comes out of mobile games. It can be the realm of product managers and analysts, and it summons all these ideas of soulless charts and casinos and that kind of thing. But when used properly, analytics can be extraordinarily useful in not only making games, but in making games better. And I love data. So that's what I'm here to talk about today, how we can use these kinds of practices as just one other tool in our game design toolbox to make games better. So everyone knows the value of playtesting, right? You've got a game and you're sure players are going to act in a particular way. And then you throw real people at it and no one can find the right buttons, people use features backwards, and there's all sorts of chaos. Usability testing is an important part of the development process, and proper analytics allows designers to do that, but on a mass level. Every game designer has intuition about what players will do, but there's nothing like actual behavior to tell you what's really going on. What levels do players get stuck on? What are their favorite characters to use, and so on. The best way to get answers to questions like those is to see what players are actually doing. There's a lot to learn from these methods that you really can't get from any other source. Sometimes you can get an answer right away to a question like what weapon is more powerful or effective. But most of the time, data is going to provide the red flag that indicates where you should spend more of your time investigating, whether that's through traditional methods or using your own experience. Either way, it's vital information that you're just ignoring if you don't take advantage of it as a designer. And by the way, we're going to have a lot of graphs and charts in this because I love them. And all of those do come from actual data. I've sort of changed the names and data to protect the innocent. But these kinds of tools can be valuable in any part of the industry on any kind of game. So the first step to actually using data is acquiring it. And the best way to start that in your own games is to track everything. Yes, everything. We're focusing on the design applications here, so I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of implementation, but you basically want to track every time a player does anything in your game. Most of what you'll then use is aggregated. What do most players do? What's the average of some measurement? Specifically, there are 3 really important things to keep track of that we'll be digging deeper on. First, clicks or taps. At a base level, every time the player taps anything in your game, you want to track it and then decide what you don't need. Now, if you're making an action game, you don't really need every movement of the character or every slide of items in a match 3, but you really want to track what players are actually interacting with. Getting more specific, you want to check every screen that's opened or the impressions that you get from each element of your game. It's not always obvious, but these can give you a lot of insight. If 80% of your players are opening the weapon forge and only 20% are upgrading weapons, then you've got some good questions to ask. Are they confused by the UI? Do they think they can afford to upgrade when they can't? Do they not see the value? Those kinds of things. The last and possibly most important to track is resources. Every time the player earns or spends anything in your game, it's a common mistake, especially in mobile, to just track premium currencies this way. But you want to actually keep tabs on your entire game economy. You want to know where players are getting their stuff and where they use it up. So if you're used to talking about analytics, you're going to be familiar with all these terms, but for those of you that aren't, this is a quick refresher. It's sort of our one dip into real product manager territory. Key metrics are what we're going to use to understand the results of the changes in the game. They're the results, not the causes. So not only do we want to track player behavior for its own sake, but you'll often relate everything back to one of these games' key metrics at the end of the day. It's the business reason we do the things we do to make games better. And the 2 main things we tend to track, at least in mobile, are retention and monetization. Retention is how many players are still playing your game on day 1, day 7, day 30, so on. If people aren't playing, they aren't doing anything else either. So it's a good way to track if something is actually more fun and the game's getting better. Looking at retention of 2 groups of players that behave differently to see, for example. And if we're talking about free-to-play, we very much track monetization numbers. Conversion is your percentage of players that are spending, and from there we can track average revenue per user, per payer, anything else. At the end of the day, mobile gaming sums up to LTV, lifetime value. How much do you earn from each player? And everything we do when trying to improve our games as a product is improving that number. So that's just the starting point. So let's move on to the really interesting bits. The first thing we're going to be looking at in regards to player behavior is engagement. Now, if retaining players are the ones opening your games at all, engaged players are the ones actually doing something in it. And this is where we often start as game designers, and this is the part that's applicable to any type of game. We succeed when people are playing our game and having fun. In this case, we're going to look at how players actually interact with the game, starting at the highest level and working our way down. First, we're going to examine every screen the player opens. Where are they actually going in your game? We're looking to see how they're navigating through, whether it's opening level select menus, stores, help screens, so on. Next, are players actually engaging with features in the game? We want to track when they start a battle, craft an item, whatever it is in your game. I'm going to use a mobile character battle game as an example for a lot of this, so that would include different kinds of battles, upgrading characters, things like that. We really want to get super granular with these actions. What battle do they start? What team are they using? Against who? What are they upgrading from? What do they spend to do it? How often do they change their deck? Things like that. That all rolls up to tell you what players are actually doing in your game. So we often want to see how players are using the things we've built and how that can impact behavior, and from there, we can learn a lot. So let's first take a look at some examples, some early beta testing in that battle game. Well, a lot of your results and data are going to feel pretty obvious, and that's perfectly fine. On the left here is the retention rate of players compared to win rate in the game. Players who win more battles tend to stick around, and players who lose quit, like you'd think. So I want players to win more. And when I was looking at what impacted win rates, I saw another clear relationship. Players who upgraded their troops won more. In fact, just getting someone to upgrade a single character had a big impact. The numbers clearly showed both the problem and a potential solution. Now, there are other ways to impact win rates. We could make battles more easier, make the player more powerful just overall. But if I think upgrading troops is fun and a good part of the game, then I want players to use that system. In this case, better onboarding and UX to get people upgrading more early made those early retention numbers look a lot better without having to do things like force players into a longer linear tutorial. We can also benefit from some careful consideration on the more traditional uses for data. This is looking at what percentage of players are actually spending money in the game, something that really always comes up, and comparing it to a few different actions. And when I did, I noticed this relationship standing out. Players who were shown to store more frequently are more likely to spend in the game, even when you hold a lot of other things constant. So, is there a way to get people to view the store more frequently that could be beneficial to them overall? In this case, I added a free prize to the game that could be claimed from the store every few hours. That drove people to view the in-game store, and just that change alone led directly to higher conversion. It was a really meaningful impact for the product that came directly from these analytics. And most importantly, it didn't take anything away from players or throw more advantage to people who were spending. It was just giving things away for free. Beyond looking at what players do, you can also look at what they accomplish. Are players completing the things you set out for them to do? Now, goals are just your milestones in the game that you set for the players. These are usually visible in the game, like beating a boss level, completing a quest, and getting a literal achievement. But you can also make them behind the scenes if you need. If you have any kind of level structure at all in your game, you definitely want to be looking at that. Look at when players complete a particular chapter, a puzzle, a fight, whatever. Don't just look at first-time completions either. Keep an eye on healthy player behavior every day. These can be literal daily goals, or they can just be benchmarks that you want to see from players every day, taking advantage of every part of the core loop, for example. Importantly, you're often looking for what players aren't doing even more than what they are doing. So here's an example from tracking daily quests in this game. A lot of games have daily quests. Implementing these can provide for a variety in play experience while also helping players come back day after day. In this example, we had a game with daily tasks that took players through all parts of the core loop: building, battling, upgrading, so on. And there was a large bonus for beating all of the quests. Now, that's purely a retention feature. We want players to be rewarded, and we want them to earn that reward every day. This graph here is showing the completion rates of each of those quests of a period of about 3 weeks. And when I saw that there was under 10% of players actually claiming that big reward, that was a major problem. So looking at the data, 2 quests in particular were standing out as lower than everything else. One of them was for opening the treasure chests you got from battles, and one of them was for playing a specific series of PvE battles. Now, that first one was just a lot of effort. You couldn't complete it in a single session on your mobile phone, and it was also redundant. I already had something for PvP. So the answer here was just to cut it. Less is more. For the PvE one, it took a bit of playing and thinking about it in particular, and I realized that a lot of those fights could get repetitive when you'd mastered one level and not really unlocked the more difficult version yet. So, had the devs add a feature to let you autoplay battles you'd already mastered. And after those changes, there was drastic improvement in players claiming all our daily quests, which is exactly the behavior we wanted. I was able to determine the need for that autoplay feature in part because of this data. It showed that players did want to complete the goals every day, and this one thing was a burden. You can often learn which parts of your game need the most improvement from these sometimes seemingly unrelated investigations. This was a lesson in learning from where player behavior is lacking compared to the other goals in the game. If one part of your game or content gets much less attention or fewer completions than the others, then there might be something wrong with it, whether it's the experience, the difficulty, or some other part. Once we're looking at player behavior and tracking what we need to, it's time to start asking questions. One of the biggest ones is seeing what kinds of behavior lead to better players, and that's where it ties into those key metrics from earlier. A better player is one that's more likely to keep playing the game, retain better, and so on. They can also have tons of metrics: longer sessions, more playtime, spend patterns, things like that. So we ask, what do these players do differently? And is there something we can do to get every player to act like that? Digging deeper, is there anything to do that players are doing that we didn't expect, and what happens when they do that behavior? So let's look at 2 more cases that show the kinds of trends that I'm looking for when I talk behaviors. This was how many players came back to the game on the second day compared to how many battles they did on their first day playing. It increased with activity, as you might expect, but there was a relative plateau in the data. This gave me a minimum number to get players to hit. If I could get players to that threshold, they were twice as likely to come back the next day as players that did practically no battles at all. This led to change the early game to really reward hitting that number. Quests, the amount of energy players had, early campaign goals with specified rewards, all valuable tools to encourage the kind of player behavior that results in them having enough time to realize what they like about the game and keep playing it. It was about trying to get as many people to that minimum threshold. On the other hand, sometimes behaviors peak. This was one early and unexpected result. Energy in that game was used for the PvE campaign, and I compared the actual amount spent by a player on the y-axis based off of how many characters they were earning from all of the various game modes and rewards. If players earned more characters early in the first session, they started spending more energy, maybe because they're having more fun or to try out the new toys. But after a point, their engagement with the campaign actually decreased. Likely because they were overwhelmed by the amount of choices, or just because they didn't feel the need to earn anything new. So it was critical to pace the early game to try to hit that peak as frequently as possible, normalizing early drop rates, giving specific rewards for the first-time completions, for example. We just wanted as many players in that sweet spot as we could, and it absolutely worked to improve the game's metrics after this change. So now that you're on top of engagement, the next thing, and my personal favorite to talk about, is tracking resources. Now, the base setup for this is a log of every transaction for each player. And from here, we can observe all kinds of things. Average earned or spent per day, whether it's over the entire population or just a segment, like new players or people over level 30. We also could track average carrying balance of a resource from day to day to see just how much of it was in the general economy. The real trick, though, is comparing these resources to how much players need. Need is derived from your content demands and your desired pace of content. Players have a level 7 unit, you want them to get to 8, then the resources needed to get that level is the need that you're tracking. This can be materials, currencies, experience, anything. And you're comparing this to actual player behavior, such as only looking at the characters they use instead of everything they own at all. Now, this type of useful view is so useful that I've actually often had a special dashboard made just for it. And it can be a lot to look at. There's a lot to explain on this one. But this is a list of resources in a game labeled as generic categories that are earned and how much are used, broken down by player level. Here, the green meant that at the level, they're earning more than they're spending, and red is when they don't have enough. So if you had a bunch of rank 5 characters and a missing ingredient X, then X would be red at that spot. This graph actually looks almost exactly how I intended it as a designer. There are certain resources that are never really in short supply. You might have to work to get them and grind a bit, but you can always get them if you want them. Others are always pinched. They give players something to work for. And other resources go through a life cycle of different phases of being hard to acquire early, being really prevalent late, and other resources take their place. I look at something like this when I want to know if players have everything they need, and if so, how to fix that. See, if players lack all resources all the time, then it's hard to point out any one of them as special or important, and hard to make that item more desirable in content or sell it. But when players need nothing, then also nothing has value, and you have pretty similar problems. Balance, as in so many things, is really key about these need analyses. Building dashboards like that view is a valuable skill. Running ad hoc queries and throwing them into Excel to make a chart is great for one-time questions, but big mobile companies are logging into those tables every day. Checking them becomes part of your routine, especially when you're looking for sudden changes. A drop or a spike in a material balance is a bad sign. It could mean that there's a bug that's live or an unexpected change in behavior, and it's another red flag that should lead you to looking at parts of your game in more detail, trying to figure out what happened. Slower changes, on the other hand, can be natural patterns, players learning the optimal paths of your game, or the meta changing, or players' value shifting. The best use of these dashboards, however, is to discover problems before players even realize they exist. In one case, I had a particular unique resource that was always much lower in payouts compared to the need, and it was actually due to a misconfiguration in a drop chance. I was able to locate and solve this before players even became aware of the problem, which they easily would have done at the higher levels. There's really nothing better than solving something before it's a major community issue. So that dashboard was great at tracking shortage or surplus of resources overall, or a single one by level, but tracking inflow and outflow of a resource over time can be just as valuable. This is a view of a single resource where each color is a different source or sink. The red represented inflow from a core game feature, and the blue was a special event that only showed up every few days. Players were really never using as much as they were earning any time before this. They just acquired the resource and never thought about it. Reducing the inflow to half didn't actually impact the amount that was being spent, but it did create better behavior. Players suddenly cared about this resource. They wanted to engage in the features where they could get it. It's always important to have critical path resources, and you have to create one if there isn't one already. So moving on from economy to content, you want to track how players actually use all the stuff in your game. In our example battle game and many mobile titles, characters or cards or units or weapons or whatever are what you're tracking here. The typical 3 things to look at are ownership, usage, and win rates. Ownership is of the entire player base or a segment you're looking at, what percentage of players own the content. Out of them, how many people are actively using it? Out of them, how many people win or succeed at a task due to it? Tracking this kind of data can be the most important task a system designer does on a game. So I'm going to look a little deeper and show how I do this in practice. And as much as I do love my tables, graphics can be extremely useful in parsing this quickly, so let's spend a little time in a little more of a visualization. So this is a bubble chart that's tracking different metrics. Usage and win rates are on the axis, and the number of players that own the character is represented by the size of the circle. For a systems designer looking to monitor the popularity and effectiveness of the content in their game, it can be a dashboard of everything going on, and I would start my day by looking at something like this. When it comes to actually interpreting the data, what I'm usually looking here are extremes. So here are some categories and what to do with the characters you found there. First are stars. Stars are the characters that are both used frequently and win frequently. That's the meta of your game. In most cases, these are fine, but anything that's too good might need a counter, or as last resort, a nerf. Sleepers are a little more interesting. They're characters that win a lot, but aren't really used much. They might be hard to acquire, or players may just not understand how good they are. Context is important here. A character that's intended to be niche and is performing in its niche and just not really used outside of it is perfect. They do not need to be made any better. A character, however, that's intended to be widely used but isn't might be confusing or look bad on the soft surface. If you've got a powerful character but with who has obvious drawbacks, they tend to hit this spot. Underperformers are characters that aren't very good, and your players know that, especially when a lot of people own it. Characters that are good and niche could be waiting for that time to shine, such as a shifting meta or a specific challenge you haven't implemented yet, or they need buffs. Not every character has to be amazing, but none of them should be this bad. Buffing underused characters is always better than having to nerf something. Updating a character like this underperformer to counter one of those stars can be a great solution to make 2 characters both more interesting in your game. The final category are fan favorites, characters that are getting a fair amount of use but are still performing below average. These can be super interesting to examine, because even though they're not great, people are still using them. It might be aesthetic preference, or it could just be fun to use. A weapon in FPS that's just a lot of fun to fire can fit into this category perfectly. Either way, it's a great opportunity to learn what people in your game like and make more of it. And it doesn't hurt to make popular options a little bit better, at least make sure they're competitive. You don't have to make them all stars since they're already desirable, but good design is often about making what players want to do actually rewarding. So just like with economy, having a dashboard of those views that you look at every day can give you enormous insights. You're looking for sudden changes again. Is a character suddenly winning much more or less than it was? Is there a spike in usage? You're looking if there's any characters that are too strong or too weak for your costing of them in their game or their availability. Commons being stronger than epics across the board really isn't fun for anyone, free players or spenders. A subtle point, but one not to miss, is to look for how trends will impact other parts of your game. If a rare ice monster is suddenly on the rise as players discover a new team where it excels, that means players are going to be needing those rare ice crafting materials. It means fire that counter it might become bigger. If you can get ahead of those upcoming trends with live operated events, you're going to look like a genius. So now that you're tracking data, what does good actually look like? These are some best practices for what it should look like when you're doing it right. First, you want to see that players are actually playing the game. That's both steady retention as well as people using every feature in the game. You want to see healthy session times per day, and everything should get better as players become elder, not worse. If so, that's a consequence of the less interested players quitting, and that can be a sign of problems in the game. No one part of the game should be neglected by players. There's always going to be things that players interact with less than others, but a healthy game is driving players through everything it has to offer. Check to see that there isn't something that players ignore because it's not worth their time, especially elder players. Next, you want to make sure that everything in your game is actually purchased or used. That means core game economic items as well as things that consume currency, premium or otherwise. Like before, it's fine for some things to be niche, but if no one is buying a particular item, then that's a sign that something is off. Be especially on the lookout for repeat purchases. If someone buys something, whether it's a gacha element, a store SKU, or just something in an in-game economy, are they buying it again? That's a really good way to check if the value that players are getting matches what you're saying and how you're merchandising it. When you're checking the economy, the last thing you want is for everyone to feel like they have everything they need. It's the fight for limited resources that makes a game economy work. And don't forget that as a designer, you control both the economy payouts as well as what players' needs are. That's recipes as much as setting the difficulty that players must beat. Make sure you're using both ends to deliver an experience that's fun and giving people most of what they need. But that's just the starting place. You want things to be limited or rare in your game. That's where excitement comes from. You want to create pinches or bottlenecks in the economy, certain things they don't have enough of. Fewer is better than many here. Having no pieces of a recipe to craft an item makes it feel like you're not getting anywhere. But if you're just missing one or two key items, now you have something to go after. Those economic dashboards are extremely valuable for this. If players are lacking a resource that you're not trying to constrain, increase the availability. If they are lacking the material that you intend, then it's a great one to give out as a reward for progress in the game, or something to grind over time, a way to push a new feature, or something to sell. Ideally, all of those. The best monetization methods always sell time. Finally, when it comes to balance, you want to check that the player's actual experience matches what you expect it to be. No one anything in the game should be much more effective than other things at the same cost. If one common is twice as good as another common it's earned at the same time, then one of the two probably has a problem. It doesn't mean everything has to be equally valuable, but you're looking for those major differences. Also, we'll always make sure that some characters are intended for specific comps or strategies, so, keep the context in mind, but it's a good rule of thumb. Also, don't just make everything powerful or expensive. Players are really alert to things that feel pay to win, even when they actually are or aren't. It's okay to have that occasional strong common, just make sure it doesn't dominate all other options. Likewise, you can have a powerful epic that's found through luck or time playing, and it can be just as strong as one that comes out of gacha during an event. You've got to set the baseline for what's strong somehow. In short, data is our friend. We're going to measure all clicks and taps in the game so we have the raw data to know what players are doing. We want to monitor how each feature and each piece of content in your game is used. If only 20% of players engage with a feature, then it's a sign that you have some work to do before it's perfect. Want to track resource inflow and outflow, creating dashboards to show you unexpected changes, shortages, or surpluses. Create the demand for resources in your game and provide the supply accordingly. And once you know what players need and don't have, reward it or sell it. That's the grand secret of monetization strategy in RPGs in a single sentence. So I hope this talk was interesting and can help some people out there. You're going to hear more from Axola and those guys in a minute, and there's going to be time for questions afterwards. But if you want to get in touch with me, my contact information is here. And as I said, you can get the slides available. So thank you all for your time.
Great. Thanks, Evan. That was fantastic. You can also get the slides right here on the platform somewhere. So just a reminder that you can ask Evan questions right now via the widget here. And you can, we're going to do a Q&A portion here for about 15 minutes at the end. So definitely stick around. This is your chance to ask an expert, like right now. Why not? Just do it. Okay, so next up is Chris Hewish with our sponsor, Xsolla, and he's going to be talking about finding new audiences for your mobile games. So take it away, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. And Evan, that was a fantastic presentation. I learned a lot. That was really awesome. Thank you. And thank you to everybody viewing today. I appreciate your time. And yeah, I want to talk with you about a really interesting opportunity that we see for mobile game companies and how we're seeing mobile companies expand onto other platforms and how they're generating some pretty significant new revenue streams by doing that. But before we dive into it, let me just give you a little overview. What is Xsolla? We are a proven game commerce company, and we provide all the products that a company needs to operate a global games business. Xsolla has been around for over 15 years. We work with a number of great companies, both on the PC and mobile side, and we have all the products that you need to do game commerce, including microtransactions, in-game stores, shopping carts, subscriptions, and we do all of it as a white label solution so that you can maintain a direct relationship with your players. So before diving into this, one of the reasons, to give you a proof point, if you look at the top mobile games of 2020, you will notice a lot of them had cross-platform capabilities. They actually had versions on PC and web as well as the mobile app stores. So, there were some usual suspects like PUBG and Fortnite, Roblox, Genshin Impact, but you see things like Raid Shadow Legends, which was kind of a surprise. They had a PC version that launched in January, which did really well. So you should check that out for sure. So if you're a mobile game company, mobile developer, you have a game, and you're wondering, we all know what some of your big challenges are, right? Discoverability is really difficult. Controlling player data, getting information is impossible through the app stores. Scaling your game through the app stores is really difficult. And the app stores take a high percentage, 30% of your revenue. And that's fine. It's a great business on there. But these are some challenges that all of which can be solved by going on to additional platforms, going to PC and web. So, what are some of the things that you should consider if you are looking at going over to PC and web? Some of the key challenges, has your game reached a plateau? Have you kind of scaled out and you're having a hard time acquiring new users? Are you seeing that your whales are actually using BlueStacks, which, allows them to actually play the game on PC instead of on mobile? Is your user acquisition taking a hit due to IDFA? Are you concerned that your game may not translate over to PC web, which you shouldn't be. Most games actually do. So these are some of the things that if you're thinking about this, don't worry. These can all be solved by coming over to PC web. And what are some of the proof points around that? And I'm going through this presentation kind of quickly, but just to give you an example, we helped Nexters bring Hero Wars and expand their business by going on to PC web. In 2016, they launched Hero Wars. It was a huge hit on social media platforms, Facebook, VK, but they were really looking at how to expand that business because their sales and player acquisition had begun to plateau. And Nexters was looking at how can they build more revenue streams. So we started working together. We collaborated with our mobile game commerce solution, and Nexters was able to bring the game ported over to the web and build a dedicated site where their players could play Hero Wars directly through their browsers on their PC. And we integrated Xsolla payments for in-app purchases, their store, support for transactions, and player inventory management. And the results were great. Nexters found that they had an improved conversion rate. They reached new markets, and they were able to actually unlock new players who had payment methods. A lot of people don't have credit cards and aren't able to actually pay through the app stores. But if they're playing on PC or web, they can use alternative payment methods, cash kiosks, and other things like that to spend on your game, right? So it opens up a whole new realm, not just of players from a platform perspective, but players from payment method perspectives. And Nexters was really able to scale the business quite a bit. And in 1 month, their users made transactions through 245 different payment options, and that increased the revenue significantly year over year. So it's a real legitimate option to pursue this. And, that's web, but there's more. PC is an option as well. I mentioned Raid Shadow Legends earlier, and they actually went over to PC. And whether you're going to web or browser, PC or browser, WebGL is really your friend now because it is ready for prime time, and it's finally a great option for games that are 3D or visually demanding. And it's especially good if you've built your game using Unreal or Unity, because these engines allow for easier porting to WebGL. And for web games, the cost per acquisition is usually lower than it is for mobile if you're on PC or web. There's really no game to install, and the experience is more direct for paid user acquisition. HTML5 was another good option for getting your game to web, suitable for lighter games and everything. But obviously PC is best for immersive experiences that players can, basically launch your game. It allows you to get a direct relationship with your players is what I'm trying to say. So Evan would appreciate this on the data side of it. You actually get to control all of that data by going over to PC Mac. So that sort of segues into what to expect from a mobile to web experience. Well, first of all, you get to unlock your full revenue potential. What I've seen a lot of our partners do before they bring everything over is they do a simple test campaign with a vertical slice demo of the game, and before they fully invest in porting the game. And I would recommend you do this and measure at least your cost per acquisition and your day zero engagement, and get a sense as to how that game is going to perform. You should find that you'll be pleasantly surprised, but at least do a test before you fully commit. If you do get over to PC and web as a mobile game, you'll also notice a positive bleed effect where people who get the web version as their first experience will often go and download the game on mobile as well. So it's a nice way to bleed over and get some additional installs back onto the mobile version. You can also try targeting lapsed spenders with user acquisition, on PC web, target people who have stopped playing your game, and get them to come back by presenting this new version, right, in a new way. You might find that some of your people who have lapsed will prefer to come back on this platform. And you should really notice that your cost per install or cost per acquisition will be a lot lower on the web. And when it comes to financials, I think it's reasonable. We've seen a number of games do this now, so we have enough data to notice this. But you can really be expecting up to an extra 20 cents per dollar earned from your mobile version on web. So if you're making, for every dollar you earn on mobile, you should at least be making 20 cents on the web version, if not more. And, this is an example from sort of mid-core free-to-play games. But if you're talking, $10 million revenue a year, you could easily be making another $2 million or more by just spinning up a web version. And one thing to note, though, is that if you do this, there will be some increase in live ops and some overhead to maintain the new version. But again, if you've done this correctly, it shouldn't be anything too heavy, and that the gains should outweigh what the costs are. Also, another thing that you can do, if you have a web version or PC version, you can really use top-ups and subscriptions to introduce new monetization outside of the App Store. So you can allow your players to subscribe to in-app value systems such as VIP subscription pages, allow them to top up, give some bonuses for virtual currency. And this is a nice way to get more of that revenue onto a platform where you're taking a higher cut. And that's a big thing to notice here. If you get a web PC version of your game, you're not paying a 30% fee to the app stores. With us, you're paying 5% plus the credit card processing fee. So you have a large chunk, 20, 25% additional savings that you're seeing from every dollar that's being spent on PC web. Again, makes it super profitable. So NetEase is another company we've helped. We helped them expand their business through these top-ups that I mentioned. They were looking at a way to create alternative localized payments for their games, and we helped them launch a top-up page in Korea so that they could sell virtual items online. And then, just to summarize it, there's no platform tax, no 30% fee on web or PC. I mentioned what those costs were. So you can see that there's a lot of upside, not just in a new revenue stream, but a higher margin revenue stream for you. So I'm kind of going to wrap it up. I think you all get the point. If you have a mobile game, you're doing well, but you want to grow it, look to PC web. It's a very viable business. A lot of our use cases already out there of people that are succeeding. And with IDFA challenges, with challenges in discovery, it's a great option to expand your business. And I want to thank you for your time. And I know there's a ton of questions for Evan, so I want to kick it back over to Chris so that we have enough time for Q&A. And I'm happy to answer what I can as well. Thank you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Chris. Appreciate that. All good stuff. So yeah, we're going to go on to question and answer time. Again, you can keep on, we got some good questions lined up already, but keep them coming, please. As a reminder, you can type your questions into the text box located to the right of the presentation window, or click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And if we're not able to get to all the questions today, we'll be able to share them with our speakers and they can reply to you offline. So yeah, with that, let's start with some questions. And again, you can keep on asking them during this time. Here we go. What's the estimated cost to tracking all these things, storing data, and then analyzing all that data?
The short answer is that data storage is cheap and analysts are expensive. You're paying by the terabyte and not a terrible amount. And when you're just having a bunch of rows in a database of the thing the person did and so on, the actual data storage isn't that bad. But it takes a lot of time and skill to run the queries and go through all of that. And you're going to pay the labor cost more than anything else. Okay.
And Chris, if you have any input or insight on any of this stuff, obviously feel free to jump in as well. I know Xsola isn't a stranger to data either. So
you got it.
All right, on to this one. Did you try to use behavior data to do data analysis in order to provide feedback on difficulty of levels? Optimum for the audience or the player, or should data that would show if something should be easier or harder?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have done this on the most recent game I launched, where we have 10 levels that players play through, and they're supposed to get a little bit harder. So I looked at the completion rates versus failure rates of every single level, and it's supposed to be this nice curve where it gets a little harder and people don't succeed as much. But there was one level in the middle that was just a spike, like a giant pit of people were bad at this. And you can use things like that to go, this level is too hard, very, very easily. That kind of behavioral data is really one of the best uses for this when it comes to tuning content.
All right. On to the next one.
Are you tuning it for like the audience or the player? Because I think I missed that part. The players, we'll usually try to tune the game for the people who we think are playing the game, and then you see who is actually playing your game, and you want to tune it for them. Never trust the developer or the QA team to tell you which levels are way too hard, because we play the game all day. We design the game. Always look at your actual players. And when in doubt, go a little easier. People enjoy games that they can beat. You can always add more difficulty later. If you make it too hard, no one's playing.
Here's one. And I just made my entire Q&A window go away. believe. Sorry, lost my place here. Okay. Kind of related to that, where does verbal/text feedback come into play when working with data?
So qualitative feedback is very much extremely useful. It just depends on what you're doing it for. Like the kind of usability testing I mentioned earlier, bring people in, have them play through a tutorial, watch everything they do. That is extremely valuable. I often will use qualitative to color the data or to explain why. One example is if your data says that, for example, that level is too hard, bring people in or watch individuals play, have them play the level, then talk to them about where they struggled. You can often use quant data to sort of narrow down on something specific, and then qualitative data to help figure out the answer and how to actually resolve it. Data does not always tell you how to solve the problem. It tells you where the problems are.
All right. Here's another one. Do you pull any statistics tied to accessibility features like TTS usage, colorblind settings, etc.?
That's a really great question. I love accessibility features. The answer is I will first find out anything that the platforms allow me to find out. You know, if I know, for example, on a device, and this has been true and not true at different times in mobile history, how many people are playing with sound, how many people are plugging headphones in, how many people are using those kind of accessibility features, then I'll track it. Generally, though, that's usually used to it's one of those things. I'll pull that data to validate doing the thing that I wanted to do anyway, right? I want to add things like a colorblind filter in the game. So we add it to our game. We say, look, how many people are using this? And then we justify using it in other products based on that. It doesn't often come up because by the time you've introduced it, you're not going to cut the feature. So it's usually used for more future development.
Is there, here's the next question. Is it ever too late to save a game with more informed data-driven decisions? Like when do you know when to cut your losses here?
It's never too late. That being said, how much you can improve is always a question. One of the things that we always can do is say, how can we optimize this game for like what it's actually doing? Okay, so we're starting to lose players, retention is going down, we've just got elder players sticking around. Okay, so now we'll look at the data to say, here is the data on just elder players, and how can we optimize the game for them? Likewise, we might say, well, why are people confused by the UI? I've definitely had games that had been running for 3 or 4 years, and we weren't getting new players anymore just because what new players expect out of a game has changed in 4 years. So you redo the entire first hour of the game to make it value for them. There's always improvements that can be made as long as the game's performing.
Don't give up. Another question. When designing drop rates and commodity pricing, do you go by intuition or are there certain common patterns or sequences that you use?
So there's definitely a bit of experience and intuition that can go into that. If you tell someone who's worked in free-to-play games that your legendary is dropping at 20% of the time, they're going to look at you like you're crazy. That being said, a lot of this can be done through this playtesting. You can, plug numbers in and start flooding the economy with things and realize it's wrong and have to pull back. Also,
oops, did we seem to lose Evan?
This is where just economy modeling can really come in handy. You can build these really complex spreadsheet models of percentage drop rates and what that will do to everything else and so on. If I'm allowed to plug, I have another talk about that out there. Don't know how much of that you might have heard, but the answer is you use intuition, you test, and you build economy models.
Great. And that might have just been my MacBook having an aneurysm and not yours. We'll know once the on-demand comes out. Here we go. Another good question. Yo, Evan, great talk. What are your thoughts on why AAA boxed product games are substantially less data-informed and rely almost solely on intuition-based design for iteration? It's a great question.
First of all, you're breathtaking. Second, I think a lot of games that run games as service or what we call live games do use data now, but a lot of AAA productions are traditionally, you make the game and then it's out there. And sure, there's patches and there might be DLC, but the game's done. So finding out that a lot of people struggle with this one boss is not necessarily going to be major changes. You don't often want to like just make a giant change to a fight. People have already been playing the game. When you run games as a service, you're constantly running new events, adding new content, things like that. I will say that any game that has like balance updates, MOBAs, card games, things like that, all of those are really doing a lot of this. Absolutely, even at the AAA level.
Mm-hmm. Next question. Are there any broad data points that either Chris or Evan have seen that are particularly notable? Like what broad data points might be important for larger strategic decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly, the one for me that has stood out, and it comes to, again, expanding your revenue streams if you're a mobile game, is the fact that we are seeing. I bet this is
something that Chris could speak to as well. But if I'm just talking very generally, it's that gaming, especially mobile, continues to get more and more accessible. There is a giant audience of people playing games that even 3 years ago would say, I don't play games on my phone. And now they're like, this is it too. I've got a couple games that I love.
I think that we have some delay happening here. Sorry, everyone. Go ahead, Chris, with your answer too.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, for me, the big data point is seeing just how much revenue a mobile game can generate if it comes over to PC web, right? And I think there's a misconception that it's a completely different platform. You really can't port mobile to PC to web or to browser. But the amount of revenue that we're seeing, that 20% to even up to 40% revenue compared to what's being made on the App Store is pretty compelling. And, being able to then lean into user acquisition, more getting the data about your players, owning that relationship. We're seeing just anecdotally more and more sort of mobile companies sort of putting their whales over on PC web because they can really develop that direct relationship. So that's the big one for me when it comes to strategic.
Yeah. Great. Here's another one that I think maybe both could speak to. What are some of the most effective ways to target mobile game audiences in developing regions, and is that worth it?
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. If your game will work on the devices in those regions, right? So the first thing you have to look at is, don't assume that the devices in different regions are going to be as powerful, right? Not everybody's on an iPhone all around the world. So if your game can perform on the hardware in that region, the biggest thing you need to do is localize your App Store page, right? Don't keep it in English or whatever your primary language is. And then make sure that the ads, really A/B test your ads to see what's working in that market. And again, don't assume that what is working in your primary market is going to work there. So hardware compatibility, localize your App Store page, and then get, some good A/B testing on localized ads.
Great. I think Evan's back. Are you there, Evan?
Yeah. I completely agree with all of that, especially localization. The fewer words you can have that are necessary to read to play your game, the better. I'll never use a word when a picture will do, kind of thing. Also, when you're designing multiplayer games, you want to have a lot of forgiveness for things like latency or, drop packets or losing, lagging in the middle of a video chat. Because when you talk about whole world, sometimes your internet connection isn't always great everywhere also. So supporting lower end devices and being a little more forgiving of connections and things like that can go a long way technically.
Great. We have a couple more. And if someone wants to submit one here last minute, please do. Here's a question. Example of a time can you give an example of a time where data led you to make the wrong decision, and how do you avoid that? That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's a really great question. It happens a lot if you look at things over a very short period of time, or if you're looking at the wrong segment. For example, in mobile free-to-play, you'll do an event and everyone will buy this one character, and you go, oh, well, everyone liked this character, so that was good. So you do the same one again, and then it fails utterly because you might have seen the result but not understood the reason. Was it because it was popular character how it looked? Was it because of the meta? Was it because you ran the event 2 weeks into January when everyone still had gift card money they were burning off from the holidays and spend is higher, things like that? I think one of the best ways to try to avoid it is to try to go as holistically as possible. Look at not just one number, right? So we do an event and we say, here's the revenue we earned, but what happens to retention a week later? How do people engage? Community managers are amazing to help avoid this kind of thing because they can say, okay, money went up, retention went up, but everyone's really pissed and we don't think we can do that again. You know, pay attention to your community, listen to them. Don't do what they say, but listen to them when they have problems.
Great. And we're going to have just enough time to do this last question. How do you quantify statistical noise?
This is the question that I saw and said, I wish I was a proper data analyst and not a game designer, because I'm probably not quite the right person. But the bigger the data set, the less the noise matters. And don't be afraid to cut outliers from the top and bottom of your data sets. I mean, know that they're there, right? If, you know, he was talking about spenders in mobile games, don't cut those outliers off. They're probably driving a lot of your business. But if there's, you know, one player who seems to constantly fail a bunch of levels when 99, you know, succeeded, maybe that's just that one player. But yeah, the less specific you can get, the more you can trust all of your data. So if you're looking at an event that only happened for 5% of the population, try to look at the behavior over the entire event as opposed to like one fight on one day of that 5%, because by the time you're slicing data that small, then it's just not that helpful anymore.
All right. So that brings us to a close. Evan and Chris, any closing comments that you want to leave on? No pressure.
You know, I'll end with sort of what I started with. I love data-driven design, and it is a tool in the toolbox. There's been, you know, if a company goes all too deep and just only follows like the latest graph, then they can start losing the actual experience and engagement and what makes games fun and the passion and players feel all of that. On the other hand, if you ignore all of it, then you're just making games for yourself and on your own intuition. And I make games for everyone. I don't just make games for myself, or I would just, you know, clone the same PlayStation 2 game every day for my entire life. So just, you know, balance it out, use it in moderation, and adopt it as something to look at. Even game designers, especially game designers.
Cool. Yeah, and, you know, I think my only closing thought would be, you know, just when you're looking at your game business, remember there's a lot of different ways to grow your business and to monetize it beyond just what's right in front of you. And companies like Xsolla are here to help. So don't be afraid to look at new ways to grow your revenue beyond just more acquisition, right? So getting onto other platforms is a great option as well.
Awesome. Well, Evan and Chris, thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us today, watching Using Data for Good. This is going to be on demand. Once again, you should be getting an email in about 24 hours or so. You can watch it again and pass it around. This is brought to you by Gamasutra, presented by our friends at Xsolla. So on behalf of our guests, Evan Losi of Exploding Kittens, and our sponsored presenter, Chris Hewish, president of Xsolla, thanks for your time. Have a great day. This webcast is copyright 2021 by Informa. Thanks, everybody.